Would you rather have me talk or be silent?
Silent. Okay.
Lila, shut up.
As I try to compose myself here after being ridiculed.
Is it recording?
This is section 3-4, page 179, solving quadratic equations by factoring. And what we started out with doing is that we started with the zero product property, and it said that if two numbers multiplied by each other is zero, then one has to be zero or the other has to be zero. That means if 3x equals 0, then x equals 0. Then we can also have quantities times each other. X minus 3 times x plus 5 times x minus 7 equals 0. If that's the case, then x equals 3 and negative 5 or 7. If we add a number in front of the x, it makes it a little bit more complicated. And we have to solve for each one, setting it equal to 0. And then solving. So we get 4/3 and 7/5. It's nice to know that you can take this number over this number and take the opposite sign and get it. Now, we can reverse the whole process by, if I give you the factors and you come up with the quantities. And Lila noticed that wasn't Maya, ever. That you can take, that this number is the back number, this number is the front, and this sign is the opposite. Got it?
Hopefully.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now you have to continue by multiplying this out using the FOIL method. This is 3x squared plus a negative 12x plus 2x plus a negative 8 equals 0. So I get 3x squared plus negative 10x plus negative 8 equals 0. All right. Now I'm going. So this is your final answer. So I'm going
That's
to.
it?
Yep. Well, no. We have a lot more to talk about. But let's talk about number 2.
This looks awful.
I'm going to give you two. I'm going to give you negative 5/4 and 1/3. And so those two are the roots. Would you please tell me the quadratic equation? Notice that I set it equal to 0. That contains these two as roots. I'm actually going to do it a different way this time. It's a little bit more complicated, but you might understand it better. Since these are the roots, this is x minus a negative 5/4 times x minus 1/3 equals 0. And what I did was, it's always x minus, and then you put the value in. And the nice thing about this is I don't have to try to come up with a memory of what is what, correct? So this is plus. Now I go x squared. The bad thing about this is watch. What is it?
Fraction.
We get fractions.
Which I'm a mess.
Okay? But I'm going to show you a little trick I learned in the Coast Guard.
Is it x squared on the first one?
Yes, it is. Any more questions?
No, sir.
Thank you. We're going to multiply them all by the least common denominator, which is
Tris.
12. what happens is, this is 12x squared. And then I take 12 times 5/4 x plus 12 times negative 1/3 x plus 12 times a negative 5/12 and then 12 times 0. So I've taken 12 times everything. What happens then, I get 12x squared plus is 3, 15x plus negative 4x plus negative 5 equals 0. So I get 12x squared plus 11x plus negative 5 equals 0. I don't know if you like that method better. That's up to you. It makes more sense mathematically to me to do it like this than to try to remember which number goes over which. Okay? Either way works. Just make sure that if you memorize it, that you know it for the test. Because that is part of the problem. Okay, so if I start with this, could you come up with this?
Eventually.
Yeah, eventually. All right, let me show you how that is. Solve each equation. (16x squared plus 8x equals 0). Is that on there? Okay. This is not a trinomial. If it's not a trinomial, the first thing you should try to do is to factor out a greatest common factor, which would be 8x, which leaves 2x plus 1 equals 0. Then we set each one of them equal to 0. So my two factors are 0 and negative 1/2. Questions?
Wait, what?
What's that?
What did you do?
Did I go too fast?
Yeah,
8x
Got
divided by
off the
8,
case.
0 divided by 8, x equals 0.
why is x on the outside?
Oh, I thought, okay.
Because I factored out a greatest common factor between the two, which was 8x.
So,
You want to see another one like
why
that?
wouldn't you just divide and have it be 2x squared
You could do that.
plus x
But at
equals
some
0?
point, you're going to factor out an x, even. You see what I'm saying? Even if you did that, even if you took 16x squared plus 8x equals 0, and you divided by, oh, let's say you divide by 8, right?
Mhm. That's what I did.
So you get x squared plus x equals 0. Since this is not a number, you still have to factor out an x.
It'd be 2x squared.
Oops, thank you. And so I'd still get 0 and a negative 1/2, no matter what. Does that make sense? Is?
Here, let me try this. No, it really does not make sense to me.
Just finish this, like do the steps to get to 0 and a negative 1/2.
By the zero product property, x equals 0, 2x plus 1 equals 0. There's an or between there, sorry. Should be an or, right? So x equals 0, we got that one. And then 2x plus 1 minus 1 equals 0 minus 1. 2x equals negative 1. Divide by 2. X equals a negative 1/2.
Did you get the 2x plus 1?
Right here?
Can we just do another one?
Yeah.
See what the heck's going on.
What do you want to do?
Take 7x.
Okay, or you can divide by 7. Either way. I'm going to factor out a 7x. Do you understand that, Izzy? And that leaves 3x minus 2 equals 0. According to the zero product property, 7x equals 0, or 3x minus 2 equals 0. Divide by 7. Move the 2 over. 3x plus a negative 2 minus negative 2 equals 0 minus negative 2. 3x equals 2. Divide by 3, x equals 2/3.
Okay, makes sense now.
Sometimes you have something like this. Okay? If you move the 64 on the left side, you'd get x squared minus 64 equals 0, correct? And you could factor it as a difference of squares. But it's just as easy to take the square root of both sides, isn't it? Just remember that when you take the square root of both sides, that this side is plus or minus. You remember that? And so what I get is x equals plus or minus 8. Does that make sense? I'm going to leave the zero product property up, just so we remember it. Now, what happens if you get a negative number?
For
what?
to poke an eye out? Oh, wait.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
X squared plus 225 equals 0. Okay? And you can do the same thing as you did over there. You can say x squared equals a negative 225. In other words, you can move it to the other side. Now, when do I know when to do that? When it's just an x squared and a number, right? Okay. And so I take the square root of both sides. I get x equals plus or minus, and that is the square root, and that is the square root of negative 1, isn't it? So we have an I. We poke an eye out. What's the square root of 225? Comes out.
25?
Yeah. Actually comes out even. I believe it's 15i, isn't it? Okay. Okay. Now let's look at this one. What if I have x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 0? Now we have a trinomial. What do you do with the trinomial?
Reverse FOIL.
Yes. Reverse FOIL. Maya, do you have a question? I reverse FOIL here. So it'd be what? X,
They're both gonna be negative.
they're both gonna be negative, isn't it? Okay. And so this is, my answer is x minus 3 equals 0, or x minus 3 equals 0. So what does x equal?
3.
It equals 3. You only have one answer. Tell me about this parabola. How many times does it touch the x-axis? One time. Where at? 3. How many times does this one touch the x-axis?
2 times.
Twice. At what?
0
Zero
and a negative
and
1/2.
How many times does this one touch the x-axis?
No.
No times. It does not touch the x-axis. It goes away from it. You see what I'm saying? And that's how you can tell it's because it does not have rational roots. What's wrong? All right?
I'm good.
You're good? All right. Would you do this one for me, please? It's negative 12x squared.
We put
We
a square,
square.
please.
I can't, why? It's It's been there the whole time, pay attention.
Sounds made up.
I mean, I saw it, I don't know what you guys
No kidding, Brian.
Whose side are you on?
The
do.
wind.
Right now I'm on the teacher side, cause he can give me an F if he really wants me to.
What do you do first?
Understand that they'll all be positive.
No, you can't do that, but you want that x squared positive, right? So why can't we divide by -1 throughout? Can we?
Yeah, I suppose.
Okay, so what we get is 12x squared plus -8x plus -15 equals 0. I think it's important that you make that positive to begin with. It's so much easier to factor. Okay? Anybody get it? Let's try 6x and 2x. And let's try 5 and 3. We normally wouldn't do that, but let's try it since you had to try the obvious ones. It looks like one of them is negative and one of them is positive, right? So let's go
Make that one negative.
negative and positive. So this is 10x and this is a negative 18x. Ooh, it got it right off the bat. Right? So I'm gonna set 6x plus 5 equal to 0, or 2x minus 3 equals 0. If I move the 5 over, I get 6x equals a negative 5 divided by 6. I'm getting a negative 5, 6. Correct? Is anybody out there?
Yes.
We're trying to get you.
Alright, stop then. And then 2x, if I move the 3 over, equals 3, divided by 2, I get x equals 3 halves. So this parabola touches the x-axis in 2 places. Now, one of the things you're going to have to do in the assignment is you're going to have to factor without solving. So you'll do this, factor this without setting it equal 0. So you won't solve it, you'll just factor it, okay? For example, let's try this one. Number 9, is it?
Yeah.
8x squared z squared minus 4xz squared minus 12z squared. There is no is equal to 0, is there?
No.
Whenever you have a factoring situation, you always have to look. This one has 3 terms, right?
We take out 4.
We think, well, go ahead.
We take out 4z squared.
Yeah, you can actually factor out before we ever start a 4z squared. And you should always do that first. That leaves a 2x squared here. That leaves a minus 4x, no, minus x, minus 3. Now that can be factored as a, I believe, as a trinomial square. You may get it. What'd you get, Brian?
4z squared, parentheses begin, x minus 1, parentheses n, parentheses start, x plus 3, parentheses n.
Okay, one of these gotta be 2, don't it?
How do you guys know all this stuff?
This is minus
Yeah,
x,
seen
and
it
this is
like
2x. That's a positive x.
It's supposed to be 2.
And
Oh,
2 times
well,
1
then
is
flip
3.
the,
Oh, doesn't one of them have to be 2x? In
Yes.
order to get 2x squared?
You would want to multiply the 2x by 2 and then the
Then-
negative.
And we gotta have a 3. I'm assuming 3 goes here maybe, and 1 goes here. That would be a negative 2x, and this would be 3x. Oh, I got the signs wrong, don't I? I got plus here and minus here, so that's 2x and minus 3x is minus, there we go. So this is how we factor.
How do you know which
Reverse
numbers
FOIL.
to use? Yeah.
In fact, this, because we did this in Algebra 1, we actually did it in geometry too. These two have to be factors of this, and these two have to be factors of this.
Okay.
And then the O and I of FOIL have to add up to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just setting it up. Okay.
Okay. Now, there's one other thing that's gonna catch a little bit of flack with you guys, is something like this. And the directions will still say factor. This is a different type of problem because it, what? It has 4 terms. So,
Can't we just combine the x's?
well, what I would do is I'd first change all subtraction to addition. Correct?
Yep.
Then I would group the first 2 and the last 2. And then I would factor something out of the first 2. I believe it would be a 3x,
Yeah.
leaving a 6x plus a negative 1. Out of the second one, I would factor out a 6, leaving a, how can I factor out a 6? How about a 4? Leaving a 6x plus a negative 1. Take a real hard look at those two.
The negative 1? How the?
Now, look at it in terms of this is a term and this is a term. What do they have in common?
6x plus a negative 1.
So I could, like a GCF, I can take a 6x minus plus a negative 1 out of both of them. If I take it out of this term, I leave it, notice this is multiplication, not an addition sign, because this addition sign goes right there. So this is 3x, and this is 4. And that's how you factor that.
So then that's the answer.
That's the answer. Okay.
Wait. Why'd you use 3x and 4?
Because when I look at this as one term and this as one term.
Oh,
the 6x
okay, they're the same thing, those two terms are the same.
So I factor that out, leaving this left and this left
Okay.
with this plus sign. in
Because
between.
it's addition, you can put it together.
Well, this addition becomes 3x plus 4.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, your assignment for Monday. So even if we don't have school, page 184, numbers 17 through 52 is due for